Welcome back, I'm Kim Bailey and this is Floral Art Review, where we use our AI, DesignEye, to give us some feedback on an old competition design of mine. And I'm always interested to see what the feedback is, because oftentimes for these competitions I haven't had any feedback from the judges. There was a change probably 5 or 6 years ago now where judges stopped giving specific feedback on designs and gave more generalised feedback on the whole of the competition. So this benefits me looking back at the design. I can see what the analysis is against the principles and elements of design, and then look at it in terms of my design journey and think about what I would do differently using that information. So it's education for me as well as for you guys. The design we're looking at this week is called Love Her Jewelled Sea, and it's a line from a poem that's very much a favourite in this country called My Country by Dorothea McKellar. And this was a bench-based design. As you can see, we had 80 centimetres, which is a little bit larger than we would normally have. So it was a good chance for me to utilise some of the things that I had been learning along the way. So the outside of the structure is actually 2 hula hoops, not used for hula hooping, but for this particular structure. They're joined together by lengths of dowel, timber dowel, so that I've got the spacing in between them, and it gives me the depth that I would like in this design. They're covered with coconut fibre wrapped in paper covered wire as well, and in between them is placed a star or wreath shape using the Gemelli technique. So a Scandinavian technique that is often seen in homewares and home decor. And this is using paper drinking straws, and it's one where I'll put the link in the description to step-by-step technique that you can see. It's actually a video because it's easier to see in a video than follow the words. What I've done is place that stand on a piece of cork board, and then underneath it to keep it in place, because otherwise it would roll away, is a shell on one side but facing away from the front, from the judging side, and a piece of driftwood on the other side. I've used some monstera leaves and some succulents to emulate sort of the things that you might see under the water, the different sorts of foliage. The main flower through it, the very tiny ones, are what we call Chinese ground orchids here in this country, and they're a little tiny purple flower. And then I've put a bit of sponge and some seaweed around, some dried seaweed around, just to create that feeling of the ocean, the jewelled sea. The jewelled part of it for me was the flowers and the wreath shape. So that said, this design didn't place in the competition, and I will say, disappointed, because I thought it was quite a good interpretation of the title. I can't recall that I don't think there was a first place given. I think there was a second place given out of all of the entries that were there, and that was all. So I'm interested now to see what the feedback is, and to help me to think about what I would do differently in terms of this design. So let's start, first of all, with the principles and elements of design. So as an overall comment, to start the feedback, DesignEye has said the work uses a circular structure and incorporates coastal symbolism, texture, and an interplay between lightness and complexity to reflect the idea of a sea shimmering with life and beauty. So interesting that the independent analysis can see what I was trying to do with the design and what I felt was shown in the design. Let's now look very specifically at the principles and elements of design. Looking at line, first of all, dominant circular line formed by the wrap structure provides a strong enclosing framework, symbolising unity and continuity, perhaps a visual metaphor for the ocean's endless horizon. The fine linear internal framework introduces a web of delicate intersecting lines, reminiscent of light fractals or reef structures beneath the sea. Well, I'd be going for the reef structure. I think it's a very evocative interpretation that it's taken. But it's a nice reminder for me that I was thinking along the right lines. Upright floral stems inside the circular form add gentle vertical lines, breaking the geometric dominance and guiding the eye upward. Very important in terms of line that those geometric shapes are very strong. And so I have to have something within it that allows the eye to rest and to move through the design. So that my feeling was that the lightness of those flowers, that they would wave around as though they were moving with the water in the ocean, and so as the light hit them they would look like they were jewels. Form. The piece is primarily circular, both literally and in its visual rhythm. The open interior creates an effective framed space, directing focus inward while remaining transparent. So what I'm getting there is the depth. Contrast is achieved through juxtaposition of the strong ring with the airy geometric core and softer natural materials. So even within the form part of the analysis, I've got some contrast. The form is volumetric but not bulky, an effective balance between openness and structural definition. And that's another good thing about the design, is that with those very strong outside circles, it could have been a visually heavy design, but the lightness inside it was still, this is where we talk about negative space, that all that space inside is still part of the design. So you don't see it as detracting from the design, it becomes part of the design, as does extending the flowers above the circular form at the back there. Colour. The dominant colours are natural browns, greens and soft purples. These earth and sea tones subtly reference the Australian landscape and coastal flora. The silvery reflective material representing the jewelled aspect of the sea adds light contrast and sparkle, lifting the colour palette from neutral to luminescent. And so that is something that I felt was important to do, because I didn't want to use embellishments. I didn't want to use silver foil or pretend jewels to have them there. I wanted it to be about, it's the way the light hits the things that are already there naturally that lift them into the jewel framework. Excellent restraint in colour use allows the viewer to appreciate the interplay between material rather than be distracted by saturation. So I'm pleased with that, and that's what we've talked about, not having the mass of components in there, of using that negative space, of inviting the viewer to look into the design so that they can see from different angles that the paper straws in that structure inside have actually got a silver band through them, so that would have caught the light as the judge was looking at it as well. Texture, one of the strongest elements of the design. Yes, you know I love texture, contrasts. The rough fibrous coconut-like rope contrasts beautifully with the delicate florals and glossy foliage. The soft netting at the base adds further tactile interest and supports the marine theme, reminiscent of fishing nets and sea foam. Use of driftwood and organic pods grounds the design in coastal naturalism. So again, it's bringing in the elements that we might see in or around the sea, not having too much of them so that they're not becoming too dominant in the design, but still giving that idea, that hint of all of the parts that make up the interpretation of that competition title. Being stuck for my words today. Space. Good use of negative space within and around the circle. The structure doesn't feel overcrowded despite its complexity. The area centre allows for a jewelled visual effect, especially through layering of elements from front to back, encouraging movement of the eye. And this is something that I was really wanted to focus on, because when you're looking into the sea, you know that there's depth there. And so I didn't want it to be too flat a design. I really wanted it to be very much three-dimensional and to make you look into and through the design. So I'm pleased that I got that done. Balance. Asymmetrical balance is well managed. The heavier base of the circle is countered by visual weight of foliage and texture. So that, when you look at it, it does look, to me, I'm a bit concerned about the shell, because to me is a little bit too dominant in terms of the structure, and I might have been better off having a little bit more foliage to cover it, have it there because it is part of the support for the hula hoops, but have it there, but have it slightly covered by some seaweed even to keep in the colours. So there's a little bit of seaweed above it. I do that bleached seaweed method so that it's not quite as dark as the standard seaweed that you might get. The circular form is stable and anchors the composition even with the directional pull created by the diagonal driftwood and foliage. So it's just those bottom placements around the base of the circle are things that I really need to think about carefully, and the more I look at it, the more I can see that it's not quite working. The one lot of foliage that comes out over the shell is coming out too far now, and it's detracting from that beautiful circular structure and depth that I've got there. And so I would look at that, and I would certainly look at the shell and certainly look at the foliage, the driftwood that is on the other side to the shell, just to see what I could do to incorporate them a bit more. Or I won't think about it while I'm talking to you. Stop. Rhythm. The use of repeated points, flowers, stems, star structure, creates a gentle visual rhythm throughout the composition. The spiralling of the outer covering may suggest oceanic motion, such as a wave or a tide line. This movement is subtle but effective. With a circular structure in a design, you're always going to get the hint of rhythm, and it's about how you use that as a base to continue the rhythm, continue the movement through the design. And I think that using that internal structure enhanced the depth of the design. As I've said all along, makes you look through the design, but it keeps you in that motion, in that rhythm of the repeated plant material, as well as repeating the way you look through the design. Dominance. The circular form is dominant, immediately catching attention and holding it as the viewer explores the interior details. Secondary dominance is shared between the silver structure evoking jewels or coral lattice and the central plant materials which maintain attention through light movement and contrast. So that's the flowers. So yes, very much so that you look, and that's why I think the shell and the foliage outside, around near the shell that is outside the design, is detracting from it. So if I put my hand over the image and just look at the structure without that there, it actually does look better. So what I needed to do was bring the foliage around to follow that curve, the bottom of the hoops, so that I continued in that rhythmic movement without detracting from the internal part that is working so well. Contrast. Effective textural contrast, shiny versus matte, rough versus smooth, hard lines versus soft curves. Contrast of line and form. Rigid geometry within an organic frame creates tension and interest. And that's something that I hadn't actually thought about in terms of contrast, because often, as you know, my contrast comes in the textural contrast. And so it's interesting for me to see that there is that contrast of line and form in terms of the rigid geometry of both of those, but having them inside one another, and then having the softer plant material creating actual vertical lines within that framework. Unity. All elements are well integrated and relate meaningfully to the theme. Nothing feels arbitrary or out of place. Unity is strengthened by a consistent material language. Every component suggests a natural coastal origin or interpretation. And that's an interesting way of thinking about unity, is does everything in your design reflect the theme, reflect the title? Is it all part of being at one with that title? So that's the unity in terms of bringing all of the plant material and your structure together. Does it all speak to the title, the class title? And so let's now, after all of that, I don't think I did too badly, look at some suggestions. Clarify focal depth. Consider slightly emphasising one floral grouping within the interior space. to act as a clear focal anchor amid the structural complexity. I can see what is being suggested. What my concern is that I love the lightness, and I love the negative space that forms part of that design. And my vision for looking at the jewelled sea was that all of these lovely movements that you get if you go in a glass modern boat and you look down through a coral reef and you see this wonderful movement and the changing way that the material faces the sun to catch the light. I'd have to really play with it to get that right. I'm not comfortable. I understand the suggestion, but I'm not comfortable about how I would bring that into this particular design. So if you've got a suggestion, you leave it in the comments below. Refined driftwood usage. The horizontal driftwood at the base could be positioned more intentionally. It currently feels a little disconnected in direction. So that's the piece that you can't see it quite as clearly in this image, but it's the other side to the shell, and it's a very straight line. So even the shell's got a little bit of roundness to it, so it still fits into that round framework. And so I think probably what I'd do is I might even take it out and I'd put another shell on the other side, another rounded shell, and have that covered with a little bit of the foliage. So I could, refining it is taking it out in my terms. Consider visual lift. The naturalistic colour palette is strong, but the addition of a tiny reflective or iridescent accent, pearl shell water droplet, might subtly amplify the jewel reference of the title. So perhaps because the shell that's there is a matte to rough finish on it, perhaps if I had a shiny shell on the other side, that might help in terms of this visual lifting. But I think what might work better is perhaps some pearls, not a whole lot, but have them maybe within the silver and white structure that's on the inside. Once again, something that I'd have to play with. I'm not big on using embellishments, as you would know from looking at any of these videos. So that's something that I would have to practice before I'd be comfortable about doing it. So an overall assessment. Overall, this is a highly poetic and thoughtfully structured piece that effectively translates literary inspiration into visual storytelling. It balances architectural strength with botanical delicacy and richly rewards close inspection. So it's a good overall assessment in terms of looking at all those principles and elements of design. Very much met the criteria that needed to be done for the judging of it. I guess without having the judges' comments at the end, I can only assume, knowing the competition, I can only assume that they wanted more colour and they wanted more flowers in it. That's how it goes in competition. I'm happier having had this assessment with this design than I was when the competition was finished, and I felt a bit disappointed, A, that I didn't get anything, and B, that there was no feedback. So this gives me feedback. So if you're in a competition where you don't get feedback, submit an image of your design and you'll get this response back. You'll get something that you can work with, something that you can think about, something that helps you on your floral art journey. All you need to do is go to the website and upload your image. Within about 24 hours, you'll have your assessment back, your analysis back, and they are looked at by human judges as well, just so that they make sense in terms of your floral art education and journey. With that, I will leave you to ponder my design for Love Her Jewel Sea, and I will see you next time. I'm Kim Bailey, and this is Floral Art Review.